Welcome to the deep dive, everybody, and get ready because we've got a real treat for you.
It's our Buzz Breakdown Christmas edition.
You know those basic Christmas facts we hear every year? Yeah, well, we're ditching those and going deep, like way deep. We dug up articles on the history of Christmas, what's up with Santa Claus, and even some of the darker side of holiday traditions.
We're going to see how celebrations have changed over centuries, from ancient feasts all the way to today's Christmas.
Plus, we'll find out some surprising things about, well, Santa Claus, of course, but also this guy Krampus, who you definitely don't want coming down your chimney.
No, not at all.
Okay, so let's go back in time, way before Christmas as we know it.
Right.
I was reading about all these ancient midwinter celebrations. The Norse had Yule, the Roman Saturnalia. It seems like celebrating during the darkest part of the year, well, it's a pretty common thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. These festivals were all about marking the winter solstice.
Oh, right, the solstice.
It was a time of rebirth and the promise of longer days coming back. The Norse Yule celebrations, now those were something else. Huge bonfires, symbolic Yule logs.
Oh, yeah, I read about those.
It was believed that every single spark from the Yule log represented new livestock in the coming year.
I love that, finding hope and light in the darkest time. That's beautiful imagery.
It is.
And speaking of celebrations, the Roman Saturnalia, that sounds like a wild time. They celebrated for a whole month, right?
Saturnalia was a month-long festival packed with feasts, gifts, and gambling. It was also a time, and this is interesting, when normal social rules were thrown out the window.
Oh, wow.
Enslaved people were temporarily freed, and they'd appoint this, get this, a Lord of Misrule. He was in charge of all the fun. Basically, it was a time for revelry, but also kind of poking fun at society.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yes.
So how did we get from these ancient festivals to Christmas as we know it today? Was Christmas always on December 25th?
That's a great question, and the answer is complicated. Early Christians, they didn't actually celebrate Jesus' birth.
Really?
It took till the 4th century for church leaders to make Christmas a holiday. And even then, there's no mention in the Bible of December 25th being his actual birthday.
Huh. So why December 25th then? Did they just pick a random day?
Well, some historians think they chose that date to overlap with pagan celebrations, like Saturnalia. By mixing in familiar traditions, church leaders probably hoped more people would accept Christmas. But, they couldn't totally control how people celebrated. Those old customs stuck around and influenced how Christmas evolved.
So even from the beginning, Christmas was this blend of old and new traditions.
It's a real cultural mashup.
Yeah, I like that. But I'm curious, what was Christmas like way back in the Middle Ages? Was it anything like Christmas today?
Well, not quite. Medieval Christmas was a multi-day celebration. They mixed religious stuff with, let's just say, a lot of revelry.
Revelry.
Think like a big carnival atmosphere. Tons of food, drinks, music, and even this Lord of Misrule we talked about earlier, causing all kinds of good chaos.
Wait, hold on. Lord of Misrule again. What exactly does that mean?
Imagine the world turned upside down for a few days. They'd pick some regular person, could be anyone really, to be the Lord of Misrule.
Okay.
And this guy, he basically ran the party, making fun of authority figures, leading everyone in crazy merrymaking.
Wow.
Even the rich and powerful had to play along.
So it's like a medieval Mardi Gras or something. That's pretty cool.
But
But wasn't there a time when Christmas was actually, like, banned?
oh yeah, you're thinking of the Puritans back in the 17th century.
Right, the Puritans.
They saw all those old Christmas traditions as way too decadent and too rooted in those, pagan ways. So they tried to outlaw Christmas altogether.
Wow, no Christmas at all. I can't even imagine that. It's wild how much attitudes about Christmas have shifted over time.
Right.
But speaking of changing attitudes, how did Christmas become so big in America? I mean, it wasn't always the massive holiday it is today, was it?
No, you're right. Christmas wasn't a huge deal in the early days of America. It wasn't until the 19th century that it really took off here.
So what changed? What made Christmas so popular?
Well, there were a few things. One big factor was this growing focus on family and sentimentality in 19th century America. Christmas, with its emphasis on being together, being generous, especially to children, it just fit right in with these changing values.
So Christmas became this heartwarming, family-focused holiday. Makes sense. But didn't some famous authors also play a role in shaping how Americans thought about Christmas? Like Washington Irving and Charles Dickens. I bet they had something to do with it.
Absolutely. Washington Irving, he wrote these really charming stories about traditional English Christmas celebrations, and Americans just ate it up. His book, The Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon, Gent, It's full of these idyllic images of Christmas gatherings, snow outside, cozy fireplaces, and everyone's happy.
Yeah, he basically painted a picture of the perfect Christmas.
He really did.
Yeah.
And then you have Charles Dickens with A Christmas Carol, which is a classic for a reason. It's a powerful story about redemption and the importance of compassion, especially at Christmas time. It was a huge hit on both sides of the Atlantic and helped cement the idea of Christmas as a time for generosity and goodwill.
It's incredible how these books actually changed how people thought about Christmas. They showed this vision of the holiday that people really wanted, I guess, a vision of peace and unity and a little bit of magic in a world that was often pretty messy and divided.
Exactly. And remember, the 19th century was a time of huge social and economic upheaval in America. Lots of tension between different classes. So Christmas offered this chance to create a shared tradition, some common ground that could bring everyone together.
So Christmas was like this cultural glue that helped unify a very diverse and rapidly changing country.
That's fascinating. And I guess as Christmas became more popular, all those old world customs that the Puritans had tried to get rid of, well, they started to come back, right? You got it. Decorating trees, exchanging gifts, sending Christmas cards, all these traditions, most of them came from Europe. They became essential parts of the American Christmas. It's like those suppressed traditions found a new life in a new world.
And let's not forget the star of the show, Santa Claus. We talked about his origins in St. Nicholas, but his story goes way beyond that. It's amazing how legends and cultural exchange can shape our traditions and beliefs in such unexpected ways.
It really is. Think about it. A 3rd century monk from Turkey becomes this jolly, gift-giving icon we all know today.
It's quite a journey.
It really shows the power of certain stories, and I think the human need to believe in something magical, especially when it's dark and cold outside.
It makes sense. And it's cool that so many cultures have their own versions of Santa Claus, each with their own unique stories and customs.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It shows that celebrating and sharing during the darkest time of year is something that people all over the world understand.
It's a universal feeling.
But before we get too lost in all the warm and fuzzy Christmas feelings, maybe it's time to explore the darker side of things.
Uh-oh, you talk about Krampus.
Yeah, Krampus, that shadow lurking behind all the twinkling lights and candy canes.
He's definitely not someone you want to meet on a cold December night. Krampus is a scary figure from Alpine folklore, half goat, half demon, and he's the one who punishes all the kids who misbehave.
Yikes.
He's like the anti-Santa. He
Yeah.
carries chains and birch sticks to discipline anyone who doesn't make it onto the nice list.
It's kind of crazy how this dark, mischievous character exists alongside the jolly Santa Claus. Why do you think Krampus has stuck around for so long, even today?
That's a good question. I think it's because he represents the other side of human nature, It reminds us that even our most beloved traditions have a complex history, light and dark, good and bad. It's all part of it.
I guess it's a way of admitting that life isn't always perfect, even during the holidays. Maybe there's something honest about embracing that.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there. But we should probably unpack that idea a little more after a quick break.
Sounds good.
When we get back, we'll dive into how Christmas traditions in America went from almost being banned to becoming the cultural phenomenon they are today. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the Buzz Breakdown Christmas edition of the Deep Dive. Before we took that little trip to the dark side with Krampus, we were talking about how Christmas became such a huge deal in America.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy to think that it was almost banned at one point.
But America changed, and so did how people felt about Christmas. What were some of the big things that made it so popular?
Well, one key thing was this growing idea of family and sentimentality in 19th century America. This shift towards softer values.
Oh, I see.
And Christmas, with all its focus on togetherness, generosity, especially for kids, well, it just clicked with these new values. So Christmas became this, warm and fuzzy holiday. But I'm also really curious about those famous authors we mentioned, Washington Irving and Charles Dickens. They must have had some influence on how Americans saw Christmas, right?
Oh, absolutely. Washington Irving wrote all these charming stories about old-fashioned English Christmases, and Americans loved them. His book, The Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon, Argent, is full of these perfect Christmas scenes, snow falling, cozy fires, everyone happy.
Like a postcard almost.
Exactly. And then you've got Charles Dickens with A Christmas Carol. It's a classic for a reason, a powerful story about redemption and compassion at Christmas time.
I love that book.
It resonated with people on both sides of the Atlantic and really reinforced that idea of Christmas as a time for generosity and goodwill.
It's wild how these books actually changed how people thought about Christmas. They presented this vision of the holiday, a vision of peace and unity and a little bit of magic. I mean, the world was a pretty chaotic place back then, right?
Yeah.
Lots of division.
Oh, absolutely. The 19th century was a time of huge social and economic change in America. So Christmas offered this opportunity to create shared traditions, something everyone could agree on and celebrate together.
It's like Christmas was this cultural glue, holding everything together. And I bet as it became more popular, all those old traditions that the Puritans tried to stamp out started coming back.
You're exactly right. Decorating trees, exchanging gifts, sending cards, all these things, most of them with European roots, they became key parts of the American Christmas. It's like those old traditions were just waiting for the right moment to make a comeback.
And of course, no American Christmas would be complete without Santa Claus. We talked about his connection to St. Nicholas, but his story is so much bigger than that. It's amazing how these legends and cultural exchanges can shape our traditions in such surprising ways.
It is. A 3rd century monk from Turkey turns into this global icon of generosity and holiday cheer. It's remarkable.
It really is.
It speaks to the power of storytelling and our need to believe in something magical, especially during the darker months of the year.
And it's so cool that all around the world, different cultures have their own versions of Santa Claus, each with their own special stories and customs.
Exact.
It just shows that celebrating and sharing during the darkest time of year is something universal. It's a human thing.
Absolutely. But even the image of Santa Claus, the one we all know so well, it actually evolved over time.
Oh, really? I've always pictured him in that red suit with white beard. Was he always like that?
Well, not exactly. Before those specific images became the standard, Santa's appearance was described in all sorts of ways. It took a few key figures to give us the Santa Claus we know today.
So who were these Santa Claus image makers? How did they turn him into the jolly old elf we all recognize?
Well, Clement Clarke Moore's poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," played a huge role. It gave us the image of Santa as this, well, jolly old elf flying from house to house in a sleigh pulled by reindeer coming down the chimney to deliver presents. It really captured the imagination of people and established some of the key elements of Santa's persona.
Ah, so that's where it all started. And then wasn't there also an illustrator who helped shape Santa's image?
You're thinking of Thomas Nast, a brilliant political cartoonist who, in the late 19th century, really brought Santa to life visually. His illustrations gave us the red suit with the white fur trim, the workshop at the North Pole, the elves, even Mrs. Claus.
It's amazing how a poet and a cartoonist had such a big impact on shaping our cultural understanding of Santa Claus.
It really is. It reminds us that traditions are constantly evolving, shaped by the creativity and ideas of the people around us. But before we get too caught up in the heartwarming image of Santa, let's not forget about his darker counterpart, Krampus.
Oh, yeah, here, Prince.
He's that reminder that even the holidays have a bit of a dark side.
It's true. There's always that balance.
Krampus, with his horns and chains and bundles of birch sticks, embodies the flip side of Christmas. The idea that good behavior is rewarded, but bad behavior has consequences. It's like a cosmic good cop, bad cop routine, with Santa bringing the gifts and Krampus lurking in the background, ready to punish the naughty ones.
It's a fascinating contrast. And I've noticed that Krampus has become surprisingly popular again lately. Why do you think people are so drawn to this darker figure, especially during a season that's usually all about sweetness and light?
I think part of it is that Krampus lets us acknowledge the darker, messier parts of life, even during the holidays. It's a reminder that things aren't always perfect and that there's a certain honesty in embracing that complexity. In a world that can feel increasingly sanitized and over-commercialized, maybe Krampus provides a bit of an antidote, a way to acknowledge the shadows without diminishing the joy and celebration of the season.
I like that. Embracing the full spectrum. But before we get too deep into the psychology of Krampus, let's shift gears and go back in time to the medieval origins of some of our most beloved Christmas traditions. What were some of the key customs and beliefs that shaped how Christmas was celebrated back then? Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been on this incredible journey exploring all the history behind Christmas and its traditions. It's amazing how much there is to uncover. Now I'm ready to jump back to the Middle Ages.
Oh, the Middle Ages. That's a fun one.
What was Christmas like back then?
Well, medieval Christmas was this really interesting mix of, those pagan customs and Christian beliefs.
Right.
It created a celebration that was both sacred and a lot more, well, let's say boisterous than what we're used to these days.
Boisterous, huh? That's what I'm interested in. I read that they had these multi-day celebrations with tons of food, drinks, music, even a little mischief thrown in.
Oh, yeah.
It sounds pretty different from the quiet family Christmas we often think of today.
Yeah. Medieval Christmas was all about letting loose and turning things upside down for a bit.
Sounds fun.
One of the most interesting traditions was the Lord of Misrule. They'd pick someone, usually an ordinary person or a student, to be in charge of the festivities.
Okay.
This Lord of Misrule would lead everyone in all the fun, poking fun at authority,
Mhm.
basically mocking the usual rules.
Wow.
Even the wealthy and powerful had to go along with it.
So it was like a time for sanctioned chaos and making fun of the people in charge. I could see why the Puritans weren't fans of that.
Yeah, not exactly their style.
But what was the point of all that revelry? Was it just about having a good time?
Well, having fun was definitely part of it, but these medieval celebrations also had a social purpose.
Oh, okay.
Christmas was a time when the rich were expected to be generous to the poor.
Makes sense.
They'd share food and drinks with anyone who came to their door, and if they didn't, well, let's just say the Lord of Misrule and his crew weren't afraid to stir up some trouble.
So it was a way of balancing things out a bit.
Exactly. Christmas was a time for celebration, but also for reminding the powerful that they had responsibilities to those less fortunate.
I like that. It shows how traditions are about more than just fun. They reflect the values of the time.
Right. And even though we might celebrate differently now, we're still connected to those ancient impulses, whether it's giving gifts like Santa, acknowledging the mischievous side like with Krampus, or just being with loved ones. It's all part of this long history.
It's amazing how all these threads, ancient rituals, changing customs, heartwarming figures, and even some scary ones have come together to create Christmas as we know it.
It really is. And even though we've uncovered a lot about Christmas in this deep dive, there's always more to learn. That's part of what makes it so fascinating.
It's a holiday that keeps evolving while still holding on to its core. It's about celebration, generosity, and hope. And that speaks to something deep within us, that need for connection, especially during the darkest time of the year.
Beautifully said.
Well, as we wrap up this Buzz Breakdown Christmas edition of the Deep Dive, I want to encourage everyone to keep exploring and questioning and discovering the stories behind the traditions we cherish. Christmas is more than just a day. It's this incredible tapestry woven from history, culture, and shared human experience, full of surprises and contradictions.
I couldn't have said it better myself. From all of us here at the Deep Dive, happy holidays, keep that curiosity alive, and remember, be good for goodness sake. You never know when Krampus might be watching.
And if you love this deep dive into the world of Christmas, don't forget to subscribe to the Deep Dive and to hit that notification bell. That way you won't miss out on our future episodes, where we'll be exploring all sorts of fascinating topics. Thanks for joining us, everyone.